Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Tuesday morning. Made it to Tuesday, made it past Monday. We have a fun challenge for you today. But if you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Robert and Biola, General Kenobi, Frank and Ferry, and Sam, Nourish. Who else do we have in here? I saw some more people. Megan, Stony, and Tim, and Ted, and Sean, and Marcia. Great to see you all. Hope you're all well. Hope you're all ready for another challenge. This one's going to be a little bit more advanced than some of our previous ones. We're going to dive into photo composition today, which is one of my favorite things to do in Photoshop because it really allows you to create your own exciting and magical experiences using stock photos or photos that you've taken by yourself. Let's see, we've got Paula from Nebraska, and Jennifer and Anna and Laura from Texas, and Ferry, if I can read that correctly. Let's see. No, I can't right now. I am practicing Japanese a little bit, but I can't read that right now. It's definitely not with all this pressure. Ohayo gozaimasu. Thank you, Ferry. All right, so we're going to go ahead and hop over to my screen, and we're going to dive in. So if you haven't participated yet in these challenges, or you haven't checked out this page yet, head on over to behance.net/challenge/Photoshop. I almost said XD. I'm usually doing the XD stuff. behance.net/challenge/Photoshop. You get all the information about these challenges. Hit the big blue button at the top. Every single day you're going to receive a challenge, Monday to Friday, except that first Monday. And you can join us in our community chat. So if I hop over here to Discord, there are 2,481 people online right now. Get information about the challenges, ask questions, share tips and tricks, have a good time. But more importantly, if you are participating in these challenges, you can hop into the challenge channel right here. And there's some great people posting. It seems like Frank very strategically posts his work right as I'm about to go live. I see what you do there, Frank. I think every day when I show off Discord, Frank is right there. Smart. I don't know. This one's kind of fun. That other one, it was fun, but I don't know about that one. Sonic, Chocolate, I love this. Great work, everyone. All right, so let's go ahead and hop over here and very quick recap. We started off the week. Everyone in the chat is now seeing that monstrosity, which is great. I like it. It's wonderful. It's creepy. But it's creepy, right? All right. So we started off last week with selecting a mask. We moved on to glow effects and using layer styles, photo editing to declutter photographs and get rid of acne and pimples and things like that. We created some stylized text, and some of it you just saw in Discord. Yesterday, we added humorous effects using Liquify, which is exactly what you saw over here, and this one here as well. And then today, we're combining multiple images using and creating a photo composition. So here we go. Let's go ahead and hop over to Photoshop. We're going to dive into things. This is going to be a fun one. So in this template, let me go ahead and zoom on in here. On the left-hand side, we have our prompt. Again, today's challenge is to create a photo composition using selections and adjustment layers. And adjustment layers are very important when you are creating photo compositions, because you're typically using multiple images. The lighting is probably different in all of them. And things like curves and levels, gradient maps, and things like that will all bring everything together. So over here to the right, we have a bunch of images you can start with. Now the two at the top, you can look at those as your base image. You don't have to use both of those. You can use one or the other. Or if you can, if you want to get creative, you can definitely use both. We're going to start by using this one on the right as our base image. And then what we're going to do as we're thinking this through is we're going to place this image of this woman on the glass right in the foreground here. And then we're going to place What did I move? I moved something. I moved something around. There we go. And we're going to place this astronaut, which might be this woman's spouse or significant other or friend or whatever. They're going to be floating away into the distance. It's a very sad scene, but we're going to have some fun with it. And hopefully you can kind of take this in your own direction. And I would encourage you, if you want to do something creative, definitely hop over to stock.adobe.com. There is a free section right here at the top, and you can search for something like space. And there are 44,000 space images that you can download with astronauts. All the images that I've provided here were downloaded and licensed from the free Adobe Stock library. So there's this one right here. All right, so what we're gonna do first is we want to place this woman over here on this image. Now, of course, if we were to simply grab this layer right here and then move it over here, can't really see much, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna be using some of the selection methods that we explored last week to cut this subject out and then move it onto that other artboard. Now, there are a few ways to get started here. We can go ahead and grab something like the quick selection tool, which is one of my favorite selection methods in Photoshop, and then, drag out on top, and it, does a pretty good job, right? Not perfect. It didn't select some of her finger, and it didn't select some of the areas here. So let's actually try out the wonderful select subject feature. So if you go ahead and press this, Photoshop is going to look at your image. It's going to determine what the main focal point is, and it's going to select that subject. And it did a pretty good job. There are some areas, if you zoom in right here, that it did not select. I can simply click on that with my quick selection tool, or I can wait on that and use a mask later on. But once I have this base selection, I'm going to go ahead and hop into select and mask, because if I were to simply add a layer mask, it did a pretty good job, but the background's white. So if I change this to black, for example, you're going to notice, there's a little bit of something going on. It's not perfect. Now, of course, the image itself is a little bit faded out, and we're going to deal with that in a moment. But I'm going to go back, and we're going to hop into select and mask, which we have explored already. And at the top here, we can choose the different viewing methods. So we can do on black or overlay on white. We're going to go with on black for now. And what we can do is we can activate a few different features. Maybe the astronaut is a DoorDash delivery driver. I like that, Wade. Actually, a fun challenge for all of you. So DoorDash is obviously, one of these food delivery services. What would a similar service be called in space? There are doors in space, but not this kind we have here. So I want to hear some interesting ideas. All right, so I'm going to start by maybe turning on Smart Radius and increasing that radius a little bit. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Now, in this case, it probably didn't because the edges aren't very defined, and there's not a lot of hair. So we're going to keep that down to 0. And for this one, we're going to grab Shift Edge right over here, because you're noticing that there's just a little bit of banding on the edge. There's a little bit of something going on. So I'm going to just bring that inwards, which is going to take that edge and kind of shift it on inwards a little bit, right? So there's basically before and then after. I can smooth it out a touch, something like that. Maybe I can increase the contrast a little bit. And we're still seeing a little bit going on here, but that's totally fine because we will be applying a mask. Hatch Dash, Dock Dash, and Satellite Sprint, Galaxy Gallop, Rapid Rocket. Oh, you're all super creative. Space Snacks, I like that, Jody. All right, so I have my selection looking okay. Not great, but that's totally fine. And I'm gonna output down at the bottom with a layer mask. And then I press OK, and now I have my new image. Again, it didn't do a great job at selecting this area here, but the beauty of layer masks is I can very easily just paint white and paint that back in. All right, so now that I have my subject extracted, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift this on over here. What did it do? It did something I didn't want. All right, let me go back for 1 second. Oh, I selected the entire artboard. That would do it, wouldn't it? Select and mask. Let me do this one more time very quickly. That was my fault. Output to a layer mask. And now that's better. Okay, now we're good to go. So again, I'm gonna zoom in here, paint that part of the thumb back in, and then I can grab this entire layer and shift it on over to this window here. And if I need to, I can enlarge this image. Now I will note that this is a rasterized image, so it's not a smart object. So the original data is not preserved, but we can of course do that. But because we're enlarging it, we're gonna get a little bit of blurriness, a little bit of pixelation. But what I want to point out is the foreground where this woman is standing. If you take a look at her surroundings, it's very blurry because it's out of focus, because this image is focused on this background. So we want to make sure to match that, otherwise it just won't seem realistic, right? So what we're gonna do is we're going to be using a Gaussian blur. And if we were to simply go up to filter and then down to blur and then Gaussian blur, you can also use the blur gallery if you want, you're gonna notice it looks very off. And that's because we have a layer mask applied. So the solution to that is to convert this layer, which contains the rasterized image and the layer mask, into a smart object. Very similar to what we did a few challenges ago. So I'm gonna right click and convert to smart object. You can also do that under the filter menu. And it's gonna take both of those elements, the layer mask and the rasterized image, and combine them into one. So now if I go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, we don't have that weird banding that was going on just a moment ago. And this is non-destructive. Why am I wearing a hat? Indeed. So I'm gonna go ahead and play around with this blur a little bit and then press OK. And it did apply it as a smart filter down here, so I can always double click on this later on and make changes if I need to. But the point of this is it now matches the rest of the foreground. So this area here is blurred, and now the woman in the foreground is blurred as well. Now, starting to think about our adjustment layers, right? The background, where the focal point is definitely in focus and it's bright and it's nice. But the foreground, it looks like it's a little bit darker because there's not as much light inside of this space station. So what we want to do is want to apply adjustment layer to make this subject a little bit darker. So right down here at the bottom, you'll see this icon, and this will allow you to add a fill or adjustment layer. And when you press on that, you have all these different adjustment layers you can add. Many of them will work in this situation. Levels and curves and brightness and exposure, probably what you want to go for in this case. So let's start with curves. And what you're going to notice, and if you've never used curves before, essentially highlights up here, shadows down here, midtones in the middle. So what I like to do, and a lot of people work very differently, what I like to do is add 3 points. I'm going to click one here, and one here. And this will really allow me to adjust my shadows, midtones, and highlights very specifically. So if I grab this slider or this point in the middle and pull it on up, the midtones are going to get a bit brighter and down. Now what you're noticing is that as I'm doing this, the tones of the entire image are being affected. So not just the subject in the foreground, which is what we want to affect, but also the space station and the planet in the background. Now we don't want that, right? So what's the solution to that? Well, what we're gonna do is apply a clipping mask. You can do that either by right-clicking on this adjustment layer and create a clipping mask right here, or you can hold down your Alt or Option key on your keyboard, Option on the Mac, Alt on Windows, hover in between these two layers and click. And that's going to apply a clipping mask so that the adjustment layer only affects the subject below it that it's clipped to. So now if I go back here and I make some changes, I'm going to pull this down, maybe pull this down a little bit, right? Just experiment with some of my tones. And now I've darkened the subject in the foreground. So if I take a look at the before and the after, right, you can kind of see that change. And it did not affect the planet and the space station in the background, which is exactly what we're looking for, right? And even if I move this subject over to the side, that adjustment layer still applies. Now, the next thing we might want to do is take this astronaut and place him or her back here outside of the space station. So, very similar to what we did before, we're going to select this layer and we're going to, let's go ahead and we can use select subject, or we can press the remove background option within the properties panel. If you don't have the properties panel, under the window menu, you can go down to properties. Let's see what happens. It did an okay job, right? Not perfect, but for one button, not bad. You can definitely get a much better result using select subject and then select and mask. But because this astronaut is going to be going into space, and there's a little bit of space stuff left over here, I'm not too concerned about this, but I'm going to grab my brush and just, brush in some of the areas here, maybe make this a bit harder. And if you want to reveal or hide that mask, if you hold down your shift key on your keyboard and then click on the mask, it'll hide it and then reveal it again. So you can kind of see it before and after, just to make sure that you're getting the right areas. Like this. Again, I'm not too worried about this. What I can do is use something like either the magic wand or the quick selection tool, or I can continue using my brush. Lots of different things you can do, but we're not going to really be able to see much of this because we're going to be putting this astronaut back into space, just in a different setting, right? So we'll see what that looks like. Not too concerned right now about this, but let's go ahead and move this astronaut over to this artboard. Now, obviously we have some problems, right? The astronaut is currently on top. So inside of our layers panel, I'm going to first start by moving the astronaut behind our subject. Now that's better, but it's still not there yet. Especially if we want to move this astronaut maybe a little bit outside of the space station or outside of the field of view, have a bit of a problem, right? So what we want to do is we actually want to, let me hide this subject for a second, and let me hide our astronaut. What we want to do is essentially cut out this picture of space from the space station. So with this layer selected, which is our background layer, we do have a nice circle in this case. So that should make our process fairly simple. I'm going to grab my elliptical marquee tool from the tools on the left. Where's the alien? That's a good question. I should have got an alien, but I'm sure on Adobe stock. Let's see. There we go. There's some aliens. So you can all use some aliens in your photos. I would definitely love to see that. So I'm going to grab my elliptical marquee tool, hold down Shift to constrain it. And that almost worked. It's not exact. Now, of course, I can undo, make a larger circle if I needed to, and try again. Or under the select menu, you can actually go down to transform selection. So you can choose that, make your selection a little bit larger without affecting any of the data behind it. Right, so I'm gonna just finesse this into place. Doesn't have to be perfect. There we go, that should do. And then with that in place, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna press Command or Control Shift and then the J key. And that's going to essentially cut out that selection from the image that we had selected. And I want to make sure to move this layer behind the space station, just to layer it properly so that, it's behind the actual porthole of this window. And then if needed, I can always enlarge it just a touch so that we don't have that very slight border. There we go. So now what I can do is I can unhide the astronaut. Whoops. Move it behind here. So if I did need to, I can always move it just outside the field of view a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and make this astronaut quite a bit smaller so that it really looks like they're floating away. Let's go ahead and reveal our subject. And then very similar to what we did with the woman in the foreground, we might want to also apply some adjustments to the astronaut. So let's go ahead and try levels this time. And again, I'm going to want to create a clipping mask. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and click in between those layers. And let's try darkening up the shadows a little bit. We can darken up the midtones a touch. Because you'll notice in the background, whoops, the sun is down here. Now, realistically, probably none of this would really be lit up because the sun is back there. It would be a very backlit photo. So all of this would be very dark. But just so we can see the astronaut a little bit more, we're gonna run with this. There we go. All right, that's looking okay. Now, one more thing we might want to add, just to really bring this image home, is don't forget fingerprint marks on the glass window. Yes, if we had more time, we can certainly do that. Actually, speaking of glass, we might want to create that glassy look, right? Maybe add a little bit of a reflection or a highlight or something like that, and then we'll get into another adjustment layer. So maybe right on top of the astronaut, right before we have our window. What we're gonna do is, we're gonna do two things. One, we're gonna grab something like the elliptical marquee tool, draw out a selection here, and we can fill this with white. So I do have white as my background color right down here, so I can hold down Command or Control and then press Delete. Whoops, it was clipped. Oh, I forgot to make a new layer. That would help, right? Down at the bottom, make a new layer. Always important. And then Command or Control Delete to fill that in. Now obviously we can't see anything, right? So you can experiment with blend modes like overlay, soft light, something like that, or you can just drop the opacity of that layer just to add a little bit of glare on this window. Then if you want to get a little bit fancier, right? What you can do is do something like this. Maybe we can also use the shape tool right over here. So we can create a rectangle. Let's draw one out. We'll draw out a thicker one here. Make sure it's set to white. We don't want a stroke on this one. Let's duplicate it over. We'll make this one a little bit thinner. Command or Control T to resize or transform. And then with all of these selected, I can rotate them. Whoops. Let's put them in a group, rotate. You don't have to put them in a group, it just keeps things organized. And then just like I did with that previous layer of the glass, you can experiment with more blend modes. So something like soft light or overlay. Soft light should work pretty well, and then if I drop the opacity quite a bit, so I just have a little bit of reflection there. There we go. And then, if needed, you can always adjust, you can try to adjust the blend mode of the astronaut itself, right? Just so it looks like it's kind of fading in the back. Adjustment layers will help as well with something like this. I don't know how I feel about that. Probably not in this case, but we can do something like maybe a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. Drop the contrast a little bit. There we go. And then, like I mentioned, one of the final things I typically like to add on these photo compositions is an overall curves adjustment layer and also sometimes a gradient mask. So similar to what we did with the two subjects, we can add a curves adjustment layer right here. And then in this case, we do not want to clip it. So I'm gonna keep it unclipped and then just play around with these settings here just until I get a nice sharp look, right? So we have our before and our after. And then something like a gradient map sometimes helps tremendously, right? And essentially what a gradient map is doing is you're mapping colors to the different tones. So pure blacks will be on the left, pure whites will be on the right, and you can, assign colors for anything in between as well. But Photoshop also has a set of legacy photographic toning presets, which I absolutely love. And if you don't have those installed, if you go up to the window menu, down to gradients, and then under this menu over here, you can load in legacy gradients. And then that will give you access to your photographic toning presets. And what's cool about these is if you click on one, it looks okay, right? It gives you this interesting effect. But if you experiment with blend modes like multiply or overlay or soft light, and then experiment with the opacity, you can start to get some pretty interesting results. And as you kind of cycle through some of these presets, right, it kind of brings everything together. And as you really start tweaking some of these adjustment layers and settings, you're gonna get some fun results. So that's gonna wrap it up for today. Hope you all enjoyed this. Hope you picked up on some tips and tricks. Can't wait to see some of your exciting photo compositions. Definitely throw them in Discord or on Behance. Big thank you to Gal and Chris and Mercurial and Clarissa, Sean, Stony, General Kenobi, Angus. Great to see all of you. I'm going to be back tomorrow, and in just a few moments, we have designing real-life inspired figures and fictional characters. That should be a lot of fun. Stick around for that, and I'll see you all tomorrow.